Chapter 1. The Dream Within a Dream. The ocean stretches endlessly, waves rolling in gentle yet persistent rhythms. A man washes up on the shore, his face worn with exhaustion. His clothes, once fine, are now tattered, damp from the sea. As he struggles to lift his head, his gaze meets the sight of two children playing in the sand, small, fleeting figures bathed in golden light. A dream, a memory. The man's weary eyes hold longing, but before he can call out, a pair of armed guards appear, hoisting him to his feet and leading him into a grand, ancient castle. Inside, an elderly man sits at an opulent dining table, his fingers tracing the edges of a small spinning top. "Are you here to kill me?" the man asks. The weary traveler, Dom Cobb, remains silent, his mind struggling to grasp the moment. Time feels distorted, reality a haze, and then, as if sinking through layers of consciousness, he is somewhere else entirely. Cobb awakens in a lavish Japanese penthouse. The air is thick with the scent of incense and polished wood. Across from him sits Saito, a powerful businessman with an enigmatic smile. The two men are not strangers. Their meeting is deliberate. "You remind me of someone," Saito muses, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A man I met in a half-remembered dream." Cobb listens intently, his expression unreadable. Beside him, his partner Arthur remains composed, though his sharp gaze flickers with caution. They are here for one reason: to extract a secret buried within Saito's subconscious. This is not a business negotiation in the traditional sense. This is a dream, and Cobb is its architect. With practiced ease, he steers the conversation, guiding Saito deeper into his subconscious, weaving a fabricated reality around him. The room shifts subtly, small details morphing to reinforce the illusion. A misplaced rug, a crack in the ceiling, imperfections meant to convince the dreamer that everything is real. The key to a successful extraction lies in this balance, in making the dreamer believe they are awake while their most guarded secrets are laid bare. But Saito is no fool. He senses the deception creeping around him like shadows in candlelight. His fingers tighten around his glass. "If this is a dream, then I must not be alone," he remarks, eyes narrowing. Before Cobb or Arthur can react, the dream fractures. The walls tremble, a distant rumbling growing louder. Suddenly, the room explodes, glass shattering, debris cascading in slow motion. The illusion collapses, and Cobb's world plunges into darkness. A jolt. Cobb's eyes snap open. He is no longer in the penthouse, no longer in Saito's mind. Instead, he finds himself strapped to a chair inside a dimly lit safe house. The echoes of gunfire ring from outside. Arthur is beside him, their dreamscape falling apart too soon. They had been caught. Mal steps forward, her presence as unsettling as ever. Her dark eyes hold secrets that Cobb cannot escape, her smile both loving and cruel. "You thought you could steal from him," she taunts. "You're slipping, Dom." Cobb clenches his jaw. Mal, his wife, his torment, his greatest mistake. But she is not real. She is a projection, a fragment of his past manifesting in this dream. And yet, she remains his undoing time and time again. Saito enters the room, unharmed despite the chaos. He kneels before Cobb, watching him closely. "You have potential," he says, "but you failed." Arthur glances at Cobb, tension in his stance. They had prepared for everything, except Saito turning the tables. With no other choice, Cobb reaches for the only escape left to them. He signals to Arthur, and then, just as the walls begin to cave in, they wake up. A sudden gasp. Cobb jerks upright, back in a decrepit candle brushing non-existent dust from his suit. "You're not as skilled as I'd hoped." Cobb's heart pounds, but his expression remains stoic. He has been through this too many times. The mission was a failure, but Saito's interest remains. That is leverage. "We can do better," Cobb says, voice steady despite the weight of exhaustion. "You need someone like us." Saito leans forward, intrigued. The extraction may have failed, but a new offer is about to be made, one that will change everything. Chapter 2. The Impossible Job. The waves crashed softly against the shore. The sky stretched infinitely, painted in hues of gold and crimson, as the tide rolled in and out in a hypnotic rhythm. Dom Cobb sat in a chair, his fingers running idly through the fine grains of sand. He could hear voices, muffled at first, then sharper, more precise. He turned his head to see an elderly man seated across from him, dressed in a crisp, tailored suit. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted a delicate piece of food to his lips. Cobb knew this place, knew this moment. But before he could linger on the thought, the scene shifted. He was waking up. The dim glow of a warm lamp flickered as his consciousness reassembled itself. His pulse still hummed from the failed extraction. The mission with Arthur, infiltrating Saito's subconscious, had gone terribly wrong. Mal had appeared, as she always did, disrupting the plan. The dream had collapsed, and now Cobb found himself sitting across from Saito once again. Only this time, in the real world. Or was it? Cobb subtly flexed his fingers, feeling the texture of the wooden chair beneath him. His mind automatically reached for the weight of a small metal top in his pocket, his only assurance of what was real and what was not. Saito, calm and composed, poured himself a drink. The amber liquid shimmered as it cascaded into the crystal glass. "You have a very unique skill, Mr. Cobb," Saito said, his voice smooth, measured. "No ordinary man can do what you do." Cobb leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. "Then you know how dangerous it is to work with me." Saito smirked. "That is precisely why I am here. I have a job for you, a job unlike any other." Cobb exchanged a glance with Arthur, who stood near the window, arms crossed. They both knew the risks of accepting work from unknown clients. But Cobb also knew that men like Saito did not make idle offers. "I'm not interested in stealing secrets," Cobb replied. Saito leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with something deeper. "I'm not asking you to steal. I'm asking you to plant an idea." Silence settled in the room. Cobb's breath was steady, but inside, his mind was reeling. Inception. The idea of implanting a thought so deeply within someone's subconscious that they believed it was their own. Most believed it to be impossible, a myth among extractors. But Cobb knew otherwise. "That can't be done," Arthur interjected. "Even the strongest minds reject foreign thoughts. The subconscious knows when an idea is artificial." Saito merely smiled, lifting his glass to his lips. "But it can be done. Hasn't it been done to you before, Mr. Cobb?" Cobb tensed. The unspoken name lingered between them. Mal. The memories came unbidden, slipping into his consciousness like a whisper. Her dark eyes, the soft curve of her smile, the way her fingers traced the spinning top before it fell. Cobb forced the thought away. Even if it were possible, why would I do it? "Because," Saito said, setting his glass down, "I can offer you something no one else can. A way home." The words hit like a shockwave. A way home. To his children, to his real life, to the world he had been exiled from, constantly running, constantly hiding. His heart clenched at the image of their small faces, their laughter echoing in the recesses of his mind. "What's the target?" his voice quieter now, the resolve in it tightening. Saito's smirk returned. Robert Fisher. He will soon inherit his father's empire. I need him to decide to dissolve it. Arthur let out a low breath. Splitting up a multi-billion-dollar corporation. That's not a simple idea. No, Saito admitted, but the simplest idea is the most powerful. The seed must be small, but its roots will grow deep. Cobb leaned back, his mind racing. The logistics, the layers, the depth of manipulation it would require. But more than that, he thought of Mal. He thought of what it had cost him the last time he had attempted Inception. Why should I believe you can clear my record? Cobb finally asked. Saito gave him a knowing look. Because I am the man who can. Cobb stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled. The wheels in his mind were already turning. The risk was enormous, but the reward, the chance to go home, to hold his children again. His fingers brushed against the metal top in his pocket, but he didn't pull it out. All right, Cobb said, his voice steady. I'll do it. And with that, the impossible job had begun. Chapter 3. Assembling the team. The city hummed with quiet energy, its neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement as Dom Cobb walked with deliberate steps. The weight of Saito's offer still lingered in his mind, heavy yet intoxicating. A way home, a life beyond the dreams that had become his prison. But to pull off Inception, he needed the best. He needed a team. The architect, Ariadne. Cobb found himself standing outside a university in Paris, a place humming with youthful ambition and fresh minds, yet untouched by the cynicism of the real world. He watched as students passed by, books clutched in their arms, lost in their own thoughts. Among them was Ariadne, her fingers smudged with graphite, her expression lost in quiet concentration as she sketched the skeletal framework of a bridge. She's brilliant, Miles had told him earlier, but be careful, Dom, she'll see right through you. Cobb approached her with careful steps, observing her work before finally speaking. You have a gift, he said. I could use someone like you. Ariadne looked up, brows furrowing. For what? Designing dreams. At first, she had laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. But curiosity won out, and when Cobb placed a small spinning top on the table, she felt something stir within her, a question she couldn't ignore. In the dream, she grasped the truth faster than anyone Cobb had ever met. She manipulated the world with ease, bending buildings upon themselves like intricate origami, twisting streets into impossible loops. She understood, but she also saw something deeper, something lurking in the corners of Cobb's subconscious, a shadow that watched them from the edges of the dream. You have a problem, she murmured, staring at the distorted image of Mal in the distance. Cobb's jaw tightened. Can you still build? Ariadne hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes, she was in. The forger, Eames. Cobb's next stop was Mombasa. The air was thick with heat and the scent of spices. The streets a maze of whispers and hidden dealings. He found Eames in the back of a smoky casino, a stack of poker chips before him, a grin playing at his lips. Mr. Cobb, he greeted, not looking up from his hand. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need a forger. Eames chuckled, tossing a chip into the pile. I'm guessing this isn't about fake passports. Cobb slid into the seat opposite him. We're going deep. We need someone who can be convincing. Eames finally met his gaze, studying him for a moment before leaning back. And what's the mark? Cobb smirked slightly. Robert Fisher. We need to make him believe an idea is his own. Eames exhaled, instant, his posture shifted. His expression softened. His voice took on a slightly different cadence. "If you're going to play with the mind," he said smoothly, "you need more than deception. You need belief." Cobb barely blinked. Eames was already in character, an entirely different person in a matter of seconds. "I'll take that as a yes," Cobb murmured. Eames grinned, taking a sip of his drink. "You know me. I love a challenge." The chemist, Yusuf. Next came Yusuf, a chemist tucked away in a quiet corner of Mombasa. The air inside his laboratory was thick with the scent of chemicals and something richer, something dreamlike. Cobb observed the rows of vials, each labeled with a careful hand, before turning to the man himself. "You need a sedative," Yusuf said before Cobb could even speak. Cobb arched a brow. "You're good." Yusuf smiled. "You wouldn't be here if you didn't need something special." He led Cobb to a small room in the back, where several men lay in reclined chairs, their chests rising and falling in unison. Dreamers, lost in a world deeper than Cobb had ever ventured. "They come here every day," Yusuf explained, "not to sleep, but to wake up." Cobb watched, understanding the weight of his own addiction. Dreams had a way of sinking into your bones, making reality feel less real. "Can you make a sedative strong enough?" he asked. Yusuf nodded. "For you, I can make anything. The final piece, Saito." As the team came together, Saito observed from the sidelines. He was not just the client, he was an insurance policy. "I go with you," he declared. Cobb frowned. "That's not necessary." Saito tilted his head. "I trust you, Mr. Cobb, but if I am going to risk my investment, I prefer to be inside the dream, not outside waiting." Eames smirked. "Well, that'll be fun." Arthur, always the pragmatist, was skeptical, but Cobb saw the value. Saito was an asset, one they could not afford to lose. The team was assembled, the job was set, and the deeper they went, the more Cobb knew this was either going to be the greatest heist ever pulled, or the last dream they would ever enter. Chapter 4. Entering the first layer. The hum of the private jet was steady, a quiet pulse of energy that vibrated through the cabin. The team sat scattered, each lost in their own thoughts, their own anxieties. The time had come. Robert Fisher sat just a few rows away, unaware that the greatest heist of his life was about to begin. His father had just passed, and the weight of his inheritance pressed heavily on his shoulders. Cobb knew this was the moment of vulnerability they needed, the precise second when Fisher's subconscious would be open to suggestion. Across from Cobb, Ariadne absent-mindedly twisted a strand of hair between her fingers, her mind likely running through the architecture she had designed for the dream layers. Arthur was silent, going through the plan in his head, while Eames shuffled a deck of cards, as if this was just another con. Yusuf, sitting beside Cobb, held a small case in his lap. Inside, the sedative, specially designed, powerful enough to sustain multiple dream layers without waking the dreamers prematurely. 10 hours of flight time, Arthur reminded them quietly. That's all we have. Cobb inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. The tension in his chest was undeniable. The job was dangerous, but his reasons were clear. This was the only way back to his children. Let's begin, he murmured. Yusuf prepared the IVs, inserting a single drop of the sedative into each vial before slipping the needles beneath their skin. The cool sensation of the drug spread through their veins, and one by one, their eyes grew heavy. The hum of the plane faded, the edges of reality blurred, and then the world collapsed. The rain-soaked city, first layer. The sound of heavy rain filled the air, a constant downpour that slicked the pavement and drummed against car hoods. The city was unfamiliar, yet strangely familiar, designed to mimic the subconscious, yet altered to fit the dream. Cobb stood in the middle of the street, droplets sliding down his jacket as he glanced around. The streets were busy, cars moving at their usual pace, people bustling by under umbrellas, all unaware that this world was fabricated, a construct built entirely within Robert Fisher's mind. But something was off. From the corner of his eye, Cobb saw the way the people moved, just slightly too aware. The subconscious was beginning to recognize an intruder. He knew they didn't have much time before Fisher's mind started to fight back. Arthur appeared beside him, shaking the rain from his sleeves. "We have a problem," he muttered. "Something's wrong." Before Cobb could ask what, a van skidded into view, tires screeching against the wet pavement. The doors flew open and gunfire erupted. Cobb barely had time to react before a bullet struck Saito in the chest. Everything stopped. Saito collapsed, gripping his stomach as blood bloomed across his white shirt. Cobb rushed to his side, his pulse hammering. This wasn't supposed to happen. Eames cursed under his breath. "That was fast. I thought Fisher wasn't trained for this." Arthur's expression was grim. "Someone trained him. His subconscious is militarized." Cobb clenched his jaw. A complication, one they hadn't planned for. The projections weren't just reacting, they were hunting. And now, Saito was dying. Yusuf's voice crackled through the radio. "We have to move. Get him in the van." Cobb lifted Saito with Eames's help, dragging him toward the getaway vehicle as bullets shattered glass around them. The city was turning against them, and if they didn't reach the next layer soon, they wouldn't make it out at all. As the van's doors slammed shut, Yusuf pressed the accelerator. The vehicle surged forward, water spraying from the tires as they sped toward the next phase of the mission. Cobb glanced down at Saito. His breathing was labored, pain flickering in his eyes. "Will he wake up?" Ariadne asked, her voice edged with worry. "No," Arthur said darkly. "Not if he dies here." Ariadne's face paled. "But I thought death wakes you up." "Not with this sedative," Cobb muttered. "If we die here, we don't wake up. We fall into limbo." The word sent a chill through the air, heavier than the rain that poured outside. Limbo, the endless dream, the place where lost dreamers wandered for eternity, forgetting who they were, forgetting what was real. Saito groaned, gripping Cobb's sleeve. "I can still help," he rasped. Cobb met his gaze, knowing what the man was offering. A promise, a sacrifice. There was no turning back now. They had to go deeper. And as the van hurtled down the road, Yusuf's voice rang through the storm. "Hold on, I'm putting us under." The world shifted again, and they fell. Chapter 5, The Hotel Heist, the second layer. The fall was smooth, like sinking into warm water. One moment, the rain-soaked city surrounded them, the rush of the van speeding through the streets filling their ears. The next, silence. Then, elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Cobb stepped out into an elegant hotel lobby, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. The lighting was dim, casting a golden glow across the pristine marble floors. This was the second layer, designed with precision and intent. Arthur was already waiting near the reception desk, dressed in a sharply tailored suit. He exuded confidence, a man who belonged in this world. He straightened his cuffs, then gestured subtly toward a corridor leading to the private suites. "Fisher is here," Arthur said in a low voice. Cobb followed, his footsteps muted against the plush carpet. The dream felt stable, but there was always a lingering awareness, a tension in the air, as if the subconscious knew something was off, but hadn't yet decided to fight back. As they moved deeper into the hotel, Ariadne whispered, "How does this layer work?" "We make him think he's under attack," Cobb explained, "that his subconscious is being invaded, but instead of resisting us, we make him believe we're here to help him." Ariadne frowned. "We're conning him into trusting us." Cobb nodded. "Exactly." Manipulating Fisher's mind. They found Robert Fisher in a dimly lit bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, unaware that he was already inside a dream within a dream. His face was drawn, his posture slightly slumped, grief for his father weighing heavily on him. Eames, already in position, leaned against the bar beside Fisher, effortlessly slipping into his role. This was where he shined, not just as a forger, but as an artist of deception. Eames had taken the form of Peter Browning, Fisher's godfather and trusted confidant. With subtle movements, he placed a reassuring hand on Fisher's shoulder, his voice smooth, familiar. "They're coming for you, Robert," Eames said, his tone hushed, laced with urgency. Fisher looked up, confused. "What?" "The people after your inheritance," Eames continued. "They want your secrets. They're already in your mind." Fisher's brow furrowed, skepticism flashing in his eyes. But before he could push back, the dream shifted. From the corner of the bar, Cobb and Arthur staged the illusion of an attack. A rush of shadowy figures burst into the room, moving fast, armed and threatening. Fisher flinched. Fear gripped him. Arthur stepped forward, playing his part flawlessly. "We need to get out of here," he told Fisher urgently. "They're coming for you, but we can protect you." The hook was set. Fisher's eyes darted to Eames's Browning, then to Arthur. His logical mind struggled against the false reality, but fear was stronger. "What do I have to do?" Fisher asked. Cobb stepped forward. "You have to go deeper." The weight of the dream. With Fisher convinced, they moved quickly. The suite was prepped, the walls lined with subtle hints to lead Fisher to the idea they needed him to believe. As Eames and Arthur worked on keeping Fisher engaged, Ariadne noticed Cobb standing near the window, his jaw tight. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "She's here, isn't she?" Cobb exhaled slowly. He hadn't said it, but Ariadne knew. Mal was always watching, waiting in the depths of his subconscious, and she was growing stronger. "You have to control it," she murmured. Cobb nodded, but they both knew it wasn't that simple. A sharp knock at the door pulled them back. Arthur opened it, revealing Yusuf, his real body still driving the van in the first layer. He spoke quickly, urgency laced in his voice. "We have a problem." "How bad?" Cobb asked. "The van's under attack. We don't have much time before we hit the bridge." Cobb's stomach tightened. They were running out of time, and they still had to go deeper. Chapter 6. The Snow Fortress. The third layer. The sensation of falling gripped them once more, but this time it was colder, much colder. As the dream settled, Cobb opened his eyes to a blinding white landscape. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, the sky a muted gray, the air thin and biting. Ahead of them, a massive fortress stood like a monolithic structure against the frozen wilderness, built from the depths of Robert Fisher's subconscious. The fortress was their destination. Inside, locked away within Fisher's mind, was the final piece of the puzzle, the secret vault where they would implant the idea. Cobb adjusted the white tactical gear he now wore, feeling the weight of the rifle slung across his back. The dream had shifted their appearances to match their environment. soldiers navigating the icy battlefield of Fisher's subconscious. Arthur's voice crackled through the earpiece. Fisher's subconscious defenses are strong here. He's fighting harder than expected. Cobb looked through his binoculars toward the fortress entrance. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, projections of Fisher's mind, trained to eliminate intruders. Behind him, Eames exhaled, watching the scene unfold. I have to say, his mind's got style. It's like a bloody Bond film. Ariadne pulled her scarf higher over her face. How do we even get inside? Cobb turned to Eames. That's your job. Eames grinned and took a step back. With a slow inhale, he shifted. His body altered seamlessly, and within seconds, he was no longer himself. He had taken on the form of one of the fortress guards. I'll clear the way, he said in a voice that was no longer his own. Eames disappeared into the snow, moving toward the fortress with the ease of someone who belonged there. Meanwhile, Cobb turned to Fisher, who stood beside them, breathing heavily. What's happening? Fisher asked, gripping his gun with unsteady hands. Why does this feel so real? Cobb placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Because it is real to you, and that's why we have to keep moving. Fisher swallowed hard, nodding. Everything was going according to plan, but deep in Cobb's mind, he felt it. That creeping sensation, like a shadow trailing too close behind him. She was here. The assault on the fortress. Eames's distraction worked. The guards at the entrance turned away at just the right moment, allowing Cobb, Arthur, Ariadne, and Fisher to slip through the perimeter unnoticed. Inside, the fortress was a maze of corridors, sterile, metallic, clinical. This was a place Fisher's mind had built to protect his most valuable secrets. They moved quickly, navigating through the halls toward the vault at the center. Arthur checked his watch. The kick is coming soon, he warned. Yusuf's about to hit the bridge in the first layer. Cobb nodded. They had limited time before the dream collapsed. As they reached the final corridor, a massive steel door loomed before them. The vault. This was it. This is yours, Cobb told Fisher. Only you can open it. Fisher hesitated, staring at the door. His mind was resisting, the subconscious walls fighting against the idea that this was something he needed to see. Cobb placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father wanted you to know something. Fisher's jaw tightened. He never. Before Cobb could push further, the air shifted. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision, and then gunfire. Cobb barely had time to react before the bullets tore through the air. The guards weren't shooting. It was Mal. Her presence shattered the dream's logic, bending reality as she emerged from the darkness, her expression calm but deadly. Dom, she whispered, her voice carrying through the cold air. Come back to me. Cobb froze. Ariadne's voice snapped him back. She's not real, Cobb. You have to fight it. But Mal wasn't just a projection. She was a piece of him, a wound that had never healed. And now, she was standing between them and the vault. Cobb clenched his fists. He had to choose. He could let Mal stop them, let the job fail, stay here in this endless cycle of dreams where she still existed. Or he could let go. Mal raised her gun. Cobb closed his eyes. The gunshot rang out. When he opened them again, Mal was gone. Ariadne stood there, her hands trembling around the pistol. She had done it. Cobb's breath shuddered, but there was no time. Fisher was already at the vault, his fingers hovering over the lock. Planting the idea. With a deep breath, Fisher turned the handle. The vault door groaned open. Inside, a simple wooden safe sat in the middle of the room. Fisher hesitated, message from beyond, carefully designed to lead Fisher to the belief they needed him to have. His father's words rang in his ears. "I'm disappointed that you tried to be me." Fisher's breath hitched. The realization took root. His father had wanted him to forge his own path, to break free from the empire he was leaving behind. The seed was planted. The inception had begun. A moment later, the fortress began to tremble. The dream was collapsing. Arthur's voice rang through the earpiece. "Time's up. The kick is happening. Now." Everything turned weightless, and then they fell. Next stop, Limbo. As the layers shattered, Cobb felt himself slipping, but he wasn't waking up. The others were leaving the dream. He was going deeper. One final place, Limbo. Chapter 7. Limbo, the Forgotten Realm. There was no sensation of waking, no slow return to consciousness, only the quiet, endless pull of something deep, something ancient. Cobb opened his eyes to a vast, desolate city. Towers stretched toward the sky, their edges worn and crumbling as if time had forgotten them. The buildings were impossibly tall, yet they leaned, some sinking into the endless ocean that lapped against the city's ruins. The air was thick with stillness. Limbo, the final layer of dreaming. Cobb exhaled slowly, his breath steady, his mind still adjusting to the weight of this place. He had been here before, lived here, built here, and so had she. He turned, and there she was, Mal. She stood at the edge of a crumbling terrace, barefoot on the cold stone, watching him with that same knowing gaze. The wind tugged at the folds of her dress, but she was untouched by it, as if she belonged here more than anything else. "You came back," she whispered. Cobb swallowed. "I had no choice." Mal tilted her head, her dark eyes filled with something deep, something unreadable. "There's always a choice, Dom." His fists clenched. "This isn't real." Mal stepped closer, her presence consuming, intoxicating. "Isn't it?" she murmured. "Tell me, after all this time, can you really say what's real anymore?" Cobb forced himself to breathe. He knew the dangers of Limbo. Time stretched endlessly here. A minute in reality could be decades in this dream. He had to find Saito. He turned away from Mal and took a step forward, but her fingers wrapped around his wrist, stopping him. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay here with me. We can build again, start over. We can be free." Cobb felt the pull, the exhaustion, the years of running. But then, a whisper in his mind, his children's laughter. Not the blurry, half-formed memory he had carried for years, but something real, crisp, clear. He could not stay. His jaw tightened as he met Mal's gaze. "I can't stay." Mal's expression flickered, hurt, then something colder. "You think you can just leave?" she murmured. Cobb didn't answer. He pulled his wrist from her grasp and turned, stepping away. Then, a knife of pain tore through his chest. His breath hitched. He looked down. Mal had stabbed him. Her face was blank, emotionless. "You belong here, Dom." The world trembled. The edges of the dream began to distort, the city shifting, cracking. The sky rippled like water. Cobb's vision blurred, his legs weak beneath him. Number, not like this. Not again. With the last of his strength, he forced himself to move, pushing through the pain, staggering forward. He had to find Saito. He had to wake up. Finding Saito. The city stretched endlessly, yet Cobb moved with purpose, even as the dream resisted him. He stumbled through the abandoned streets, past the remnants of a world he had once built, searching for the one thing that mattered. And then, at the far end of an empty hall, sitting in silence, was Saito. But he was older now. His hands trembled as he lifted a delicate teacup to his lips. His hair had grayed, his face lined with years of solitude. Cobb's heart clenched. He had been too late. Or maybe not. He stepped forward carefully. "Saito," he called softly. The old man blinked, his eyes flickering with recognition. But it was buried beneath something else. Doubt. "Have we met before?" Saito asked, his voice rough, weathered. Cobb nodded, stepping closer. "Yes," he whispered. "We were young men together." Saito's brow furrowed. His hands hovered over the teacup, as if some part of him knew, some part of him remembered. Cobb knelt before him. "This isn't real," he said gently. "You've been stuck here for a long time." Saito stared at him, struggling against the weight of forgotten years. Cobb reached into his pocket and placed a small metal top on the table. The old man's breath hitched. The top spun, a perfect, impossible spin. The walls of Limbo shuddered. Saito's fingers twitched, and suddenly his eyes cleared. The fog of years lifted. Cobb exhaled. "Come back with me," he murmured. Saito's lips parted, and then everything collapsed. Chapter 8. The Final Kick. The world shattered around them. Cobb felt the pull, the sensation of weightlessness gripping his body, dragging him upward, tearing him away from Limbo as the collapsing dream devoured itself. Falling. Or was he rising? His consciousness surged through the layers, snapping back toward reality. The third layer, the snow fortress. The fortress exploded, the shockwave rippling outward, shattering the dreamscape. Snow and debris twisted in slow motion as Fisher stood before the open vault, his father's words still echoing in his mind. The Inception had taken root. Arthur's voice rang through the earpiece. "We have to go now." Above them, the gravity shifted. The second layer was collapsing. The second layer, the hotel. Arthur moved swiftly through the shifting hallways of the hotel, the zero-gravity environment making every step weightless. The world tilted as the van in the first layer plummeted off the bridge, throwing the dream into freefall. Arthur braced himself. The elevator was prepped, the final kick to jolt them back up. Inside, the team lay unconscious, their bodies waiting. He grabbed the detonator. 3.2.1. Arthur triggered the explosives. The first layer, the van. Yusuf's hands were tight on the wheel, but he could do nothing now. The van hit the water with full force, the impact sending a crushing wave over the windshield. Inside, the team gasped awake, their lungs filling with the desperate need for air. Cobb, still half trapped between Limbo and reality, felt the cold rush of water against his skin. His mind struggled to fully surface. Saito. Where was Saito? Chapter 9. The ending. Is it a dream? The roar of the airplane engines was the first thing Cobb registered. Then, silence. He inhaled deeply. The air was still, real. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The private jet cruised smoothly through the sky. Around him, the team was waking up, each adjusting to reality once more. Arthur blinked, looking toward Cobb, a quiet confirmation passing between them. Yusuf rubbed his face, letting out a sigh of exhaustion. Eames smirked slightly, as if to say, "Well, I'll be damned." Across the cabin, Fisher sat upright, unaware of what had just happened. His brows furrowed as if a thought had just surfaced. An idea planted so deeply that it felt like his own. The Inception had worked. Cobb's gaze drifted to the seat across from him. Saito, still unconscious. Cobb's fingers clenched into fists. Had he failed? Had Saito been lost in limbo? Then, a quiet gasp. Saito stirred. Cobb sat motionless, watching as the older man slowly came to. Their eyes met. A moment of understanding passed between them. And then, Saito reached for the phone. Landing in Los Angeles, Cobb stepped off the jet, his bag slung over his shoulder. His breath was steady, his pulse even. He didn't question whether Saito had kept his word. He knew he had. At customs, the officer barely glanced at his passport before stamping it. He was free to go home. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped outside the airport, the warm Los Angeles air brushing against his face. A taxi waited. The drive home felt endless. Then, the house, the back door, the soft glow of sunlight spilling across the wooden floor. His children's voices carried through the air. Cobb's breath hitched. He stepped forward. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against cool metal. The top. He placed it on the table, spun it. It twirled, smooth and seamless, a perfect, unbroken motion. Cobb's eyes lifted. The children turned. Their faces, clear, real, his. A slow smile spread across his lips. He stepped away. The top spun and spun and spun.